Hi, I'm Meta Spencer, and let's talk about producing television shows today, shall we? I know this is not the typical thing that we talk about on this show, but I have a game plan. I have a fantasy that I'm going to share with two friends of mine who don't know each other, but who can give me some advice. And I'll let you in on this conversation, which is going to take a little longer to set up than normal because I have to explain where I'm coming from, and it's not the usual place. The two people I'm going to speak with are William Ryerson, who is the founder and president of Population Media Center, which is an organization in Vermont that tries to improve the health and well-being of people all around the world through the use of entertainment to educate. And he makes radio and television series dramas, which he broadcasts, and they're designed specifically to address people's issues about reproductive health and how many children they should have and all that. So it's I've been watching his work for many years, and I very much admire what he does. But there's another person I admire, and he does something also as entertainment, which is quite different from what Bill Ryerson does. And this is Richard Stratton. Richard is a filmmaker, a writer, and he was a creator of a television show that I watched, or I sat on the set for. He let me come every day I wanted and sit there for hours. So I think I really spent over 500 hours on his set as I watched them shooting this show called Street Time. Richard was an international marijuana smuggler. And in 1982, he was arrested and sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. But he was pretty good at learning his way around the law and figured out how to get himself out. And since then, he has been publishing books and films and television series and documentaries and all kinds of very interesting things, much of which has to do with the criminal justice system. And so both of these, and of course, he approaches his work in the way that I think most producers of television series do. They are looking to entertain people and not necessarily to get them to change their practices or way of life, as William is. Bill Ryerson is trying to change people. I'm not sure that Richard is, but we'll get to that in a bit. I have to explain why I want this peculiar conversation with two people who don't know each other, but who have experience in producing serial dramas. Okay, about 20 some years ago, I had my hips replaced. And so I spent a long time in bed or in pain. But I started watching in the daytime a show called Northern Exposure, which I found I got so engrossed with it and really obsessed with it. And I found that after I had watched it for about 2 hours, I didn't have any pain, which interested me. Because, what would this TV show do? Well, turns out that I needed certain kinds of emotions. And if you have certain kinds of emotions, you will, it produces hormones and I don't know, what are they call these little chemicals in your body that actually change your pain threshold, and as well as a lot of other things. So I got interested in all the other things that a drama might do, because what happens is that vicariously, when you really get into watching a drama, and that is if you identify with characters over a long period of time, then you feel as strongly bonded to them as you would to a real person. And in any case, if you identify with a thriller movie or horror movie or a love movie or whatever, your body creates vicariously the real chemicals in your own body that this imaginary person or this fictitious character supposedly is experiencing as you watch him. So you replicate in your own body the experiences of other people that you identify with or vicariously feel. Okay, so that has a lot of implications, because it turns out that people learn things from their social relationships very strongly. And this fact can be learned can be used as a way of influencing people's behavior. And Bill Ryerson is somebody who knows this very, very well. He has been producing shows that are deliberately intended to change people's way of addressing their issues of reproductive health and so on, so as to reduce population growth, among other things. But this method, called the Sabido method, has been used for other purposes as well. I've talked to people who've used it in order to increase the people's desirable acceptance of adult education, for example, or I think Bill has used it to reduce the incidence of child marriage in India and other places. So these can be used deliberately to change the way people behave, but it takes a long period of time, many months of moving people along through a storyline to get them to change their point of view on things. And this is always involves social relationships, parasocial relationships, where you feel strong feelings about the characters that you're watching. Now, I'm very interested in this because as a peace activist for the last 40 years, maybe, I have become disenchanted with our success. I cannot get people to listen to me when I want to tell them we have to get rid of nuclear weapons. They don't care. Or they are not upset about it, and they should be, but they're not. And so putting up ads or trying to give speeches to them, it's not working too well. My theory is what we need is a TV show about, let's say, two friends. One of them is somebody who is in charge of a missile in a silo in North Dakota or someplace. And the other one is, let's say, a Greenpeace activist and staff. And they should get together a series of dramas over a period of many months and talk about their dispute about whether nuclear weapons are good for us or not. And over this time, we hope that there will be a change of opinion. There's a technique developed for writing scripts that does exactly that. So, and Bill Ryerson is a master at that. He uses that technique. Now, so I got the idea, look here, every day I'm doing exactly what I'm doing right now. I sit at my computer with a microphone and a camera and a Zoom connection, and I talk to people all around the world, and it's fun. It's a lot of fun. Well, I could make a movie too. I could take this camera out to the living room and have my friends play characters that I write, if I could write a script that would be appropriate. And we could talk about nuclear weapons, or we could talk about COVID and why they should get vaccinated, or we could talk about, all the other things that I want to get people worried about global warming, and they're not sufficiently worried about it. So I want to change public opinion. And I believe the best way to do it would be a TV show. For example, I liked the idea of having, I had a conversation with a guy in Russia who was the head of the Yabloko party. And I said, we were talking about the fact that Russian political culture has a way to go before it really is ready to be democratic. This was many years ago. And I said, well, what you need is something like the West Wing, only it'd be set in the Kremlin and have the president of Russia with his staff, and they'd be good people showing exactly what should be done about whatever issue is current in Russia at the day, all the political issues. And this would demonstrate good governance. And he said, oh boy, you can do that, and I'll quit my job as leader of the party and I'll spend my life working on that, because that'd be wonderful. We agreed that would be terrific, but he thought maybe I could just snap my fingers and make it happen. And it didn't happen. I couldn't do it because you try to go to Hollywood and get people to fund your shows, you don't get it even in the front door, even the back door. So it doesn't work. But I'm thinking now, anybody with a very, very small budget could do it with just the equipment that we are using right today. So that's my fantasy. I want to either do it myself or get some of my people interested in writing a long-running script about nice people solving global issues and dealing with them seriously and addressing them honestly, the way they're not doing today, most people. And I want to produce a TV show, or I want my friends to do so if I can't manage it. But for this, I need some advice. I need to talk to people who've actually made TV shows. So that's the setup for today's conversation. I want to get advice from Bill Ryerson and Richard Stratton about how to make a TV show that people will want to watch for entertainment purposes. I don't want them to think that I'm doing something to them. I want them to watch it because it's fun or enjoyable or interesting. But I want it to have the kind of impact that it should have. Okay, let's have that conversation. Hi, guys. Here's Bill Ryerson, and here's Richard Stratton. Say hello, guys.
Hello.
Hello. Nice to be with you, Meta.
Bill, persuade Richard that I'm not a crackpot. Okay, let's start.
I'll give you one piece of evidence for starters. Back during the Clinton administration, I was involved in a gathering of Hollywood professionals to talk about the use of serial dramas for social change. And we had Donna Shalala, then Secretary of Health and Human Services in the US government, come and speak. And she made the comment that more people get their health information from soap operas than get their health information from medical professionals. But she also provided some very strong evidence. Not long before that, she had decided to help 2 TV shows address the AIDS epidemic. And what happened was that each show was given a unique toll-free number, an 800 number that people could call in response to the show. One of the shows was 60 Minutes, which has a huge primetime audience, or did at the time. And the other was a daytime soap opera with a much smaller audience called Bold and the Beautiful. Both of these shows addressed AIDS. 60 Minutes did so with its normal news magazine format, talking about the epidemic and the risk of infection and what happened to people who became infected and so on. And then they ran the 800 number that people could call and talk to a counselor. Bold and the Beautiful had a character named Tony who had been coming into people's living rooms for years, find out he was HIV positive. And then he addressed how to deal with that situation. And again, they ran an 800 number that people could call to speak with a counselor. Even though 60 Minutes had a much larger audience, the number of phone calls generated by Bold and the Beautiful was 10 times that of 60 Minutes because of the emotional impact on people of this character with whom they had fallen in love, discovering his HIV status. And this reinforces a finding of a brain scientist named Paul MacLean, who made a study using electrodes of the different functions in different parts of the human brain to try to uncover what parts of the brain did which activities. And he found that behavioral decisions were made in the parts of the brain that deal primarily with emotion. So we think of ourselves as rational beings, but in fact, most of our behavioral decisions, and it's certainly true in romance and family matters, but it's true in buying a car and a lot of other things, are primarily emotion-based decisions. I heard a conversation on public radio just last week about vaccine hesitancy, and 2 psychologists were saying information is not enough. We need role models who people identify with, who will talk about the struggle they went through deciding whether or not to get a vaccine, and then how they resolved it and how they feel after getting the vaccine. And that's exactly what we've been saying all along. You can't rely on information. And indeed, in the world of public health, information is notoriously ineffective at changing behavior. Emotion is what really motivates behavior change. So just to use one more example, in a radio soap opera we did in Sierra Leone, where we modeled family planning use, that program, which was on for 208 episodes, it was twice a week for 2 years, pulled in half the population of the country as regular listeners. And at clinics, 1,500 clients were asked why they had come for family planning. 50% of them named our program by name as the source of motivation to seek family planning. So these programs can be hugely effective at modeling behavior, never telling the audience what to do, but just showing the benefits by characters that are charismatic and with whom the audience has been identifying for months and years, adopting a new behavior and realizing the benefits of that, and also showing negative characters who suffer the consequences of their behaviors. And it can dramatically change social norms on a nationwide level.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, that's actually what I learned over the years, and I think it's a very important lesson. But, how do you import this into, how do activists adopt this? Because, we don't have deep pockets. And Richard certainly is aware of the challenge of dealing with executives who are looking at how much money they're going to make from a different show. Richard, what's your reaction to this? And by the way, I don't think you ever wrote a show with the idea of trying to change public opinion, did you? Or are you, was there a hidden message that I was not aware of during those 500 hours that I sat on the show, on the set, watching you produce Street Time?
I think we were, in some regards, trying to influence public opinion. Certainly with the Rob Morrow character in Street Time, a lot of people have a sort of stereotypical idea of what an ex-convict is and how an ex-convict behaves when they get out of prison. And Rob Morrow's character, of course, was very different from that. He was a family man. He was a good man. He'd spent time in prison, but was not an ex-con with the attitude of I'm going to get back at the world for having locked me up. So I do think that Street Time did try to humanize people coming out of prison. Mm-hmm. And many of the people who would have a sort of convict being released of the week, different people. And we tried to show the wide variety of people who had been locked up for whatever reason. And some were dangerous, but many were not. And so I think that there was really a goal behind Street Time, and that was to look at the criminal justice system from the point of view of people who had been in prison coming out and how they're going to readjust to living in free society and humanizing them. So yes, we did have an agenda, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Well, I also know you've made documentaries, and a lot of what you do is oriented in some of the same direction, creating an understanding of the plight of people coming out of prison and facing the kinds of unfair mistreatment and stereotypes and prejudice that they get because of their record. And I think that is a very commendable and desirable message to impart. So, I want to salute you for doing that. Now then, the question is, what is the best way to do that? Would Street Time or some other serial drama have an impact that a documentary is not likely to have? And that's where I wound up thinking that you could make something like 60 Minutes, or I could do my talk shows every day of the week, and I do. And I make good shows with experts talking sensibly, but I don't know how much impact that has. I don't think it has as much as it would if I were putting on a drama that they got deeply engrossed in. So, making for independent people to use the same technology that I'm using, like Zoom, to produce fiction would be quite a departure. I don't know that anybody's ever done that. And it may be totally unrealistic. I know you had a crew of probably 50 people working on Street Time just to produce it. And how many people wrote those scripts?
There's a writer's room, and the creator of the show, the person who originally came up with the idea and probably wrote the pilot, would be in charge of that writer's room, but would have anywhere from 4 or 5 other people in the room, experienced TV writers. They would break the story where they would sit down and discuss the story, then map it out, and then one of the writers would be given the job of writing that particular episode.
How much leeway do the writers have in inventing other plots? I know that within any show, you have not just one storyline going on, but you have maybe three plots interwoven within
Right.
any episode. And some of them would be extending over a long period of time. What goes on with this guy's family and what's going on in this other guy's family, in the same show.
The executives who control these TV shows actually have the final word as to what is going to be written, what's going to go on the screen.
Mhm.
And many a discussion is held with the writers and the executives. And I know when we were doing Street Time, there was Showtime, and there was a team of executives from Showtime. And then there was the studio. That was another set of executives, and the studio, of course, puts up a large percentage of the money. So they have also a lot of input into what the show is. And these two different sets of executives had two different agendas, because the executives from the network wanted what we call a soap opera, not meaning soap opera like usual, what we think of as soap opera, but a soap opera meaning continuing stories that are going to go on and on and on over many episodes. And the network or the executives from the studio want to sell the show overseas to different foreign distributors. So they want shows that more have a beginning, middle, and end, and are wrapped up in a single episode. So there's two different agendas there. But what I tried to do, and I think what a lot of TV writers try to do, is do both. So you have an A story that may get wrapped up within a particular episode, beginning, middle, and end in an episode. And then you have a B and a C story, a B story that's following maybe one of the main characters and developing over an arc of however many episodes you're going to have for a particular season, and then a C story that may be the omnis story. That's like in Street Time, it was getting out of prison on parole. That was the big story of what we were trying to tell with that show. And then we would have, as I said, the A story, which would be the Rob Morrow's character story. Then the B story, which would be, we always had a different parolee getting out on each episode, and the problems that they faced. So that's the general way that I think most TV dramas are written.
Bill, tell us what the basic technique of writing a Subito plot would be, and to what extent is it compatible with what Richard has been describing for a network type of show?
Subito turned all of this on its head. Rather than starting with a plot and a storyline, he started with values. And he said, okay, what are the values related to family harmony in Mexico? And he pulled together representatives of all the key institutions in Mexico, the Communist Party all the way to the ruling political party, the PRI, and the Catholic Church and the Ministry of Health and on, all the key representatives. And he said, I want you to tell me what are the positive values and the negative values related to family harmony in Mexico. So they wrote things like, it is good that couples have only the number and spacing of children that they can afford to care for and provide love to. It is bad that there are families who abandon their children and they live in the streets of Mexico, and on and on. And they produced multiple pages of what was a values grid. And then they signed it. He had all of the institutions sign this values grid, that this represented the positive and negative values related to family harmony in Mexico.
Now, wait a minute. He was looking for things that they had a consensus on. All of these institutions would agree to them.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
So what we call this document is a policy framework. What is the policy with regard to child marriage, with regard to girls' education, with regard to the rights of women in the workplace, with regard to accessing family planning methods and information, et cetera?
But hold on, because you're not going to get a consensus on all of those things. The Catholic Church is not going to tell you the same thing as Planned Parenthood would.
Well, that's true in the West. In our situation, we're looking at what is the government policy. So we're not looking to private institutions like the church or Islam to tell us their opinion. We're looking at what is the official policy.
And the official policy in Mexico at the time was to encourage people to use birth control.
Mexico in 1973 legalized contraception, and he was doing a family planning telenovela in 1976. So indeed, the policy was people should be allowed to access contraceptives of their choice. So he did have that, but he also had the Catholic Church's agreement that, number one, correct information is not harmful. And number two, that having more children than one could afford to care for is a bad idea. So there were statements of values that the Catholic Church and the other end of the political spectrum all agreed on. Mm-hmm. Then he said, okay, we're now going to create settings, and within those settings, characters who represent each of the values. So this is, in traditional melodrama, good and evil characters who are battling over some issues. But in Sabito's formulation, middle of the road characters designed to represent segments of the audience who were getting conflicting information from the positive and negative characters about what they should do to improve their own life situation. So the positive and negative characters were advocates among the middle of the road characters. And over time, they try different advice and get consequences. And over time, those consequences become greater and greater as they get pulled back and forth between the negative and the positive. And ultimately, these characters realize that the positive advice they're getting from the positive characters is working for them, and the negative character advice is causing them negative consequences. So they evolve gradually and haltingly into positive role models, and they demonstrate both the benefits of their new behavior and how to deal with the pushback that comes from trying something new, like family planning, or like in Ethiopia, sending your daughter to school rather than selling her into marriage at age 14. So these transitional characters are identification characters for the audience. And over time, the audience is so in love with them, they're naming their children after them. Mm-hmm. And they evolve into positive role models for the audience. And these characters are designed within a setting. So they may live in a rural village, they may live in an urban center. And the plot, rather than being in some writer's head at the beginning, emerges from what values the different characters in a particular setting hold. So the plot of your life, in part, has to do with who lives next door to you, which you didn't write into a script unless you moved into a planned community. And the interactions you have with your neighbors are organic. So in fact, the plots of these Sabito style serial dramas are organically arrived at. They are no less exciting than traditional plots, but they are arrived at based on the realities through extensive cultural and formative research of the situation in each of the settings. So people very much identify with these characters. And we've gotten letters from people saying, how dare you use my uncle as a negative character in your program? Well, in fact, we didn't know this person or their uncle, but they see friends in these characters or enemies. And indeed, because they get so wrapped up in the storylines of these transitional characters, and of course, in the suspense, the cliffhangers that happen at the end of each episode, they are on the edge of their chair through dozens or hundreds of episodes until the whole thing gets resolved. And so, as I mentioned, we can pull in half the population in some countries where there's not extensive competition. But the Hollywood model is quite different, in part because, as with Brazil and India and other highly competitive and fragmented media markets, the goal of commercial broadcasting is to sell products. So the idea is to have as big an audience as possible.
You want people to watch too, don't you? And you have a lot of success in getting.
Of course.
In these countries, you have, how many countries have you produced shows in?
53 so far. We've reached 530 million people.
Wow.
And I'll just jump to Hollywood because it hadn't occurred to me that we could work in Hollywood. We're a small nonprofit charitable organization. And a donor gave us a few $1 million and said, look, you're working in places like Africa and Mexico and Nepal, but we have a teenage pregnancy problem in this country, and I want you to do a TV program to address it. So I thought, okay, I couldn't produce my way out of a paper bag. And I went to Hollywood and spent a week shaking hands with production companies and networks, and every one of them assured me I didn't know what I was doing and I would never get an episode on the air if I spent the rest of my life in Hollywood. And I took that as absolute truth. And I came home and I said, okay, we have this grant restricted to doing a TV program on teen pregnancy. And since the highest rates of teen pregnancy are among Latino teens, let's do a program for them and we'll put it on our website. So we engaged a researcher who did research in East LA and came back with the advice that, in fact, the aspirational language of Latino youth in East LA is English. And even though some of them speak Spanish at home, they're all speaking English at school, and you should do a program in English. So I went to LA and met with the just retiring head of Telemundo. And I said, here's what I want to do. And she said, well, it's a great idea. And here's the person who I think could do it for you. And she connected me to Carlos Portugal. And over lunch with him, we agreed on a plan. I hired him as head writer and director of a show that he then hired the writing team for. And we trained them in how Sabito creates settings, characters, and storylines. And they created a show, 24 episodes of a TV show called East Los High, as in East Los Angeles. It's a fictional high school where the storyline was set. And I said, okay, when it's ready, we'll put it on our website. Well, Carlos said, before you put it on the website, let me put it out for network inspection. 8 networks wanted it. We looked at the media consumption patterns of our audience, and they were doing a lot of their TV consumption in online programming. So we chose Hulu, and it became the longest running program in Hulu's history. It was in the top 5 for 5 years. It was the #1 show among Latino viewers for 5 years. It had a huge impact on issues related to teen pregnancy and domestic violence, while being commercially successful. So, in fact, part of our approach to Hollywood has been to say, look, yes, you have the traditional way of creating programs that are designed to be commercially successful, but producers and writers who are members of society and care about the world their children are going to inherit can do something really valuable at the same time as having a successful program by modeling positive behaviors that will help improve the lives of their viewers. So we now have a team in Hollywood creating right now about a dozen different shows that are in development. But it certainly is not likely to change the approach of most television production. And indeed, the approach that I mentioned with The Bold and the Beautiful is also hugely effective on issues where one or a few episodes can address an issue. But some issues require a long period of time to bring about meaningful change in attitudes and behavior of the audience. So if you have a headache and I suggest you get an aspirin, that's like a 5-second public service announcement. But if you're a farmer in rural Ethiopia and I suggest you send your daughter to school instead of selling her off into marriage at age 14, that's not an easy thing to do with a PSA or even a one-episode program because we're dealing with an ingrained cultural norm. So changing that requires a long-term intervention, and that's where 200-episode serial dramas are hugely effective.
How long are your shows on the whole?
Generally between 150 and 200 episodes.
And you do, many of them are radio, not TV, right?
In countries where radio is the dominant medium, yes.
Yeah. And they usually are things that the whole family listens to at night together.
Correct.
But you call them melodramas. They do have the form of a good guy and a bad guy exemplifying different ways of behaving.
Yeah,
and then
with the key addition of a middle of the road set of characters who are being influenced by the good guys and the bad guys.
Great. I visited a woman and she had a place where her whole organization was devoted to providing medical information to scriptwriters, both in TV and movies. And she said that people would, the writers would call her and ask her medical questions, and she'd provide accurate information. So as a matter of fact, Richard, you'll remember that after Rob Morrow did Street Time, he went on and did a show called Numbers. Yes. Well, I watch that sometimes too. And there's one incident, Rob Morrow's character has a brother who comes in and says, well, I got my driver's license renewed today. And they said, well, did you, the father and Rob Morrow's character say, well, did you sign this card saying that you're going to donate your organs if you get killed? And he said, oh, no, I didn't do that. I was afraid that they'd somebody take it before I'm ready, And so the father and the brother said, oh, no, go ahead and sign it because we'll make sure nobody gets your parts before you're through with them. And they laugh, and he said, okay, I'll sign it. So I knew damn well where they got that.
I think you're talking about Hollywood Health and Society.
Yeah.
And I had a little bit to do with the founding of that. It was a CDC official who came to an event we held in Hollywood who realized, oh, the CDC should be involved in this, and they funded Hollywood Health and Society at the Norman Lear Center at USC.
Now, the thing is, I have my own TV channel now. It's called YouTube. I own it, and I can put anything I want up. I could get some amateur friends to participate in various ways, certainly by being bit players in the drama. Whether or not I could hire professional actors is another question. But I could also get some friends of mine to help with the script writing, but I don't think that our scripts would be very good. I think we need some help with this. But my notion is that if somebody like you or somebody like, what Bill is doing, he's got an organization that promotes this, and then build this thing somehow into having an audience internationally. I guess all of these would have to be in English, but there's enough English spoken around the world to make it kind of realistic to use English. Tell me, Richard, how crazy am I?
Well, I don't think there's anything that's too crazy at this point. I think that the way the world is consuming media now and how things have changed and what the internet has done and computers is just, it's cleared the board so that there's really no limit to what can be done now. You don't need a big production company. You don't need all the expensive camera equipment, and you don't need the means of disseminating it is so much different now. It's just wide open with the internet, like what we're doing right now. So you're not crazy. You just you're inspired and you want to do something that's worth doing. So my advice is to do it.
And most people will call you crazy until you succeed.
Right.
Certainly attitudes toward homosexuality has amazingly changed, and a lot of that is attributed to the effect of dramas in Hollywood. And also, of course, there was the case of Archie Bunker. And I think that's an interesting case because it was written as a way of making a buffoon, Archie Bunker, a real jerk, but kind of a lovable jerk, or you could tolerate him and sort of laugh at him. And he was supposed to exemplify all the bad values. In other words, he's not really a villain. It's not a melodrama. It was I don't know what to call it, but he was the bad guy, but he wasn't really a very bad guy. And that may be the way one would like to go. I'm thinking, for example, in Northern Exposure, there's the guy who was the astronaut, and he's a laughable jerk in some ways, but also a positive character. So you don't have an out and out villain. You have a mixture of people, and that's the way life is. People are really.
I would say that villain is the wrong word, and so we no longer call these characters villains or evil characters. We call them negative. So Archie Bunker was designed to be a negative character with regard to issues of bigotry. And it was intentionally done by Norman Lear and his head of drama, Virginia Carter, who was one of our early board members and did pro bono training of our writers all over the world in order to address bigotry in America. And indeed, there was a lot of humor in that show. It wasn't all what one thinks of as highly dramatic melodrama. And I think lots of formats, including comedy, can be used to bring about change. But showing somebody in a buffoonery way, like he was designed to be, was effective at changing attitudes about issues of race and other types of discrimination.
Do we know that for sure? Because I have heard people say he was such a likable character that probably what happened was that a lot of the audience really identified with him, and they learned that they should keep their mouths shut if that's the way they think. So really what we have now, I'm making this up as I go along because I haven't heard anybody say this, but if there's any truth to that, what you'd have now is all these people who support Trump coming out of the woodwork. They've believed this all along. They thought this way and felt this way all along. But because of people like Archie Bunker making it unacceptable to talk this way in public, they shut up. And then when Trump comes along and acts out for them in public in a way that he gets away with, that gives them permission to come out again and display their bigotry.
Well, I know from many conversations.
You could make a case for that. And I don't know whether there's anybody who's really done the evidence for whether or not it changed public opinion or sort of hid public opinion.
Yeah. I can give you a little bit of a response. I had dinner with Norman Lear, and I've had years of conversations with Virginia Carter. And of course, they did not know about the Sabito methodology since this show was created totally independently of that. But one of the things that we think is very important in order to not have what we call the Archie Bunker effect, people identifying with the wrong character, is to have that character have negative consequences of their behavior. So, in fact, there were certainly people who identified with Archie Bunker and thought, let me model my behavior after him. And so one of the things we're very careful to do to avoid the Archie Bunker effect is to have the negative characters have negative consequences. Like in Tanzania, a truck driver with a girlfriend at every truck stop and a subservient wife waiting at home. And the men loved this program. This guy was having the time of his life. And when he was home, his wife told him he had to use condoms because she knew what he was up to on the road. And so she survives and she becomes an entrepreneur and founds her own business, while in the storyline, he dies of AIDS. And so the men who were attracted to his lifestyle suddenly found out he had made a fatal lifestyle decision, and 82% of the audience changed their behavior to avoid HIV infection. And the audience numbered 58% of the population of Tanzania. So you've got to show negative consequences, or you can have the Archie Bunker effect. And even then, you can have the Archie Bunker effect. In the case of the Tanzania experiment we did, 4% of the men by the end of the program thought Archie Bunker was, thought this character, Mkwaju, who was a truck driver, was a decent role model. But that meant 96% of the men thought he was a really negative role model. So it's important to show consequences. Absolutely.
Okay. Except now, I don't know what, I didn't ever watch Archie Bunker, maybe 5 minutes I saw, I didn't see much. But you can only kill a character once. Archie Bunker didn't get killed. Maybe that's too bad. He should have died of something or other as a result. But there could be people who do things to him, negative things to him for his bad behavior.
Yeah, characters can suffer in ways other than death. Death is a way to terminate a character in the storyline, but you can certainly have characters suffer, and the suffering should be related to their lifestyle.
But I think even with Archie Bunker, he was made to look to be a fool. And he was not idealized, I don't think, in that show. I mean, his attitudes and a lot of the fixes that he got himself into because of his attitudes had negative consequences. I don't think people really looked at him as a positive role model. I think Norman Lear was very clever in making him attractive, but also seen as not the kind of person that you want to be. I mean, certainly that's my take on Archie Bunker, and I think a lot of people felt that he was a buffoon and that he was a narrow-minded a Trumpist in many ways.
Yeah, that's true. But has there been, or was there any research actually in polls asking people whether they like him or whether they identify? You wouldn't ask them if they identify with him, but you might ask them something like, do you think he's right about race or something or other, and see whether people reply and whether they changed over time. Of course, even though it was a long-running show, I don't think it was designed to have any trajectory. In other words, he was the same guy in the last show as he was in the first show, I presume. So, but with this transitional character idea, you got a middle person who goes through some sort of big transition, and that is apparently the crucial thing to show. Now, was there anybody like that in Archie Bunker? I mean, who went through some transformation over time, changing in a liberal direction? I don't know the plot line really.
Maybe his wife a little bit, Edith.
Yes.
And certainly a colleague of mine influenced Norman Lear to have the son-in-law, played by Rob Reiner, who is called Michael in the show, or affectionately by Archie Bunker, Meathead, have a vasectomy. So actually, Michael, the character, role modeled vasectomy at the suggestion of a colleague of mine. But it wasn't designed based on Sabito. So a lot of the elements we've talked about were not there. And as far as I know, there was no research on national audiences about their attitudes towards Archie Bunker. It would have been a great thing to study.
it would be very interesting to know what this public opinion response to the vasectomy would be. I would think that would be one where you'd have to build this up over a period of many episodes to justify it. Or
oh yes,
that's a heavy one.
There were a lot of interpersonal conversations by Michael with people about this before he did it.
Oh, okay. So he was sort of the Sabito method there, and that one, huh?
Sort of.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I would not want to make a heavy melodrama because I think I want something a little soft edged. You know, the thing I loved about Northern Exposure was everybody was likable. It's not your kind of show, though, Richard. And, could you imagine making it into, you know, a storyline like Street Time, where you've got a parole officer, the story about a parole officer and his family, and the story about the parolee and his family, and they're both in each episode. Could you imagine making that into something that would have an intentional plan to gradually move public opinion about some particular issue? Where you say you do it for when it regard to attitudes toward the criminal justice system and the fairness or the unfairness of how parolees are treated and so on. But could you put a plot line like that with the intention of making changes that would affect public opinion about a lot of other things like climate change or COVID vaccine acceptance, or you know, what to do about the creating an international treaty on nuclear weapons and whether the US should sign it, and things like that. Because one of the things is, you know, with a story like a network show, and I think in yours even, there are always like 3 storylines going on at one time, 3 different plots in interwoven over a period of time, and only one, as I recall, with the Sabito method, only one of them is relevant to the message that you want to teach. If you want to change public opinion about using birth control or something, not everything going on is about that. They'll have their other adventures and their other things going on. So maybe we could have a show sort of like Street Time, but one of the plots would involve changing other values about, let's say, nuclear weapons, or what drastic changes need to be made to control global warming, et cetera. Richard, what do you think?
Well, look, I think anything is possible given good writing and compelling characters. You have to create characters that an audience is going to relate to and want to invite into their homes every week or however often the show is on, and who are going to become involved in the lives of those characters and be moved. As you mentioned early in the beginning, it's about evoking emotions from your audience and from getting your audience truly involved on an emotional, psychological, intellectual level with these characters and with whatever they're going through. And then, of course, you can create a show, a storyline around these issues, global warming, the environment. I mean, look at what's going on now with these unbelievable weather events. And you could certainly have that happen in a show where, you know, a whole building is destroyed by floods and all the stuff that's happening, which is unbelievably serious as far as the future of our planet is concerned. So yes, I truly think that you can. You know, of course, the question becomes, with television, who's going to put it on the air? Is it a network show? If it's a network show, forget about it, because you've got advertisers, and those advertisers have got an agenda. And if your agenda is different from the advertiser's agenda, you're probably not going to get your show on. With these cable shows like HBO and Showtime and Hulu and some of those other shows, you can do a lot more. But again, it's a question of getting the network behind it And look, they're looking at the bottom line. They're looking at how many subscribers they can get to sign on to their show. So it's an economic consideration. Everything is about the dollar. And it's not easy, but it can be done. And the way we used to talk about it, Mark Levin and I, my partner and I, we would talk about what we tried to do was a kind of subversive way of getting these different topics that we wanted to explore into the show. So you do it in a way that's not blatant, and you have characters that represent some aspect of what you're trying to get into the subject line for the story to be about. And there's a way to do it, even when you're being scrutinized by studio executives who don't want to see anything too serious or too controversial on their show.
Is that it?
Richard makes a very important point. The biggest risk, and it's something we have to counter all the time for well-meaning writers who want to turn everybody into a climatologist, is that you will kill an audience if you make it too issue heavy, too full of information. It has to be primarily entertainment. And most people do not live their lives around the issue of climate change or nuclear weapons or anything else. So these issues, as Richard said, have to be dealt with subtly. But indeed, there can be dramatic things like flooding and firestorms that illustrate the issue. But if you overwhelm the audience with the issue itself, they will turn off the show, and then the networks will not be interested.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much for your advice. Now all I have to do is find a team of about 100 people who are all professional or with experience and want to work for free.
Well, you don't need 100 people. You really only need 10.
All right. Well, I need actors though too, and my friends say I can't act. So.
Oh, listen, people. Well, look, the first movie I ever made was a movie called Slam that became a huge success.
It was.
Won Sundance and it won the grand jury prize at Cannes. Not one person in that show was a professional actor.
Really?
So, of course.
Okay.
Saul Williams has gone on to do amazing work, but they were all people that were real people. And it's amazing when you put them in particular role. People, you look at kids. Kids are a perfect example. Young kids, they're natural actors. You just tell them what you want them to do, and they do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we have planted a seed today in public opinion. All the viewers are now instructed to give this some thought. And if I can't produce a show like this, well, maybe you can. And maybe we'll all do it in our spare time with our spare change. And it's been fun having this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. And I appreciate meeting you, Bill. And thank you again, Metta.
All right.
Thank you. And again, Richard, great to connect with you.
Yes,
okay.
Bill. Absolutely.
Take care, guys.
Likewise.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Been fun. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.